Okay, so we're going to continue on with Genesis, starting at chapter 48, and we'll just see how far we can go. And it came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, "Behold, thy father is sick." And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And he's thinking, hey, my dad's sick. I need to go say goodbye and bring my sons, his grandsons, and let them say goodbye too. And one told Jacob and said, "Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee." And Israel, on that information that Joseph was coming, he strengthened himself and sat up in bed. So he was laying down, ready to die. And then he sits up and, puts his feet over the side of the bed. And we find in another place that he's leaning on his staff. And Jacob said unto Joseph, "God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. And he said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession." He ended up becoming incredibly wealthy. God was blessing this man, even though he was a deceiver, because God picks whoever he wants. Okay, verse 5. "And now thy two sons Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine." He's claiming those two sons as his own, like he's performing an adoption right there. And it could just be the formality of that he wants to bless these sons, so they need to be his sons. So he's claiming them as his own. And he said, "And thy issue which thou have after them, they're going to be yours, but they will be called after the name of their brethren and their inheritance. And as for me, when I came from Paddan," that's in Mesopotamia, "Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when there was yet a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrath. The same is Bethlehem." So she was buried basically right outside of Bethlehem. And what's kind of interesting about that is that later on, when King Herod is seeking the life of Christ as a baby, and he thought he would be 2 years or under, he had all the babies killed in Bethlehem and the coast around. And there's a verse that talks about Rachel weeping for her children, because those would have been her descendants. And it's just kind of an illustration. It's an interesting fact. "And Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, Who are these?" Because he is basically practically blind because of old age. "And Joseph said unto his father, These are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place." I like the way he gives the credit to God. He always gives the credit to God. "And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim with age, so that he couldn't see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them." Now remember, he's sitting on the side of the bed. "And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed." And Joseph brought them from between his knees. So he was sitting on the side of the bed, and he had the boys there between his knees and was hugging them and kissing them. He knew he was going to die. "And he bowed himself with his face to the earth." So Joseph and his sons bowed before Jacob. "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him," because he realized by him saying he wanted them to be his sons that he was going to bless them. He put them so that the eldest, the firstborn, Manasseh, would be in position for Jacob's right hand, and that Ephraim would be in position for Jacob's left hand, which would be the lesser blessing. "And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly." He knew exactly what he was doing, because he was being directed by God to make these blessings anyway. "And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God who fed me all my life long unto this day. The angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the land. Actually, those two and all the other sons, his name was given on them because they were all called the children of Israel. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon Ephraim's head, it just pleased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. He's like, no, this isn't right. The firstborn should get the best blessing. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, father, for this is the firstborn. Put the right hand on his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of, not just one nation, a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, in thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die. But God shall be with you, and shall bring you again unto the land of your fathers. So he's making a prophecy right there. And it certainly comes true. Because, when they came there, they didn't know how long they were going to stay. They thought they were just coming to get relief from the famine, and then they'd go back. But they ended up staying there for hundreds of years. Moreover, I have given unto thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword, with my bow. Okay, so chapter 49. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together and hear ye, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. So I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail, except maybe with a couple of them. Because later on, as we're going through the Bible, and these things start happening, we'll refer back to this. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, in the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. That's how he started out. But he didn't finish that way. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up into thy father's bed, then defiled thou it, and went up to my couch. He went and had sex with one of the handmaidens that came with Leah and Rachel. So that kind of X'd him out of the firstborn position. Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their confidence, unto their assembly, mine honor, be not thou united. So he's saying these two together, they are double trouble. They're going to split them up. For in their anger they slew a man. No, they slew a whole town of men. And in their self-will digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So what these two guys had done was, back after Jacob came from Mesopotamia, and after he came back and was settling, they were encamped in a place near the Hivites, and there was a prince of the country named Hamor, and he had a son named Shechem. Well, Leah is the mother of these two boys, Levi and Simeon, and they had a sister who was also from Leah, and her name was Dinah, and she got raped, basically, by Shechem. And so these two wanted revenge for their sisters. So what they did was, the son was just heartache. He wanted Dinah so bad. So they made this deal, and they said, well, according to our law, you need to be circumcised, like every man in the town, and then we'll do trade. Your wives can marry our sons will marry your wives, and we'll give you Dinah. So they're thinking, okay, yeah, this sounds like a good deal. We'll do it. And so they did. And on the third day after they were circumcised, and they were in the most pain that could possibly be, which was on the third day, Levi and Simeon went in, they slayed Hamor, and they slayed his son Shechem. They took Dinah out, but then they went nuts. They went and slayed every man in the whole town. And then they took the wives and the children and all their substance. Jacob remembered that, and he decided these two should not be together. And so when he says that they're divided, what that means, divided in Jacob, was that the kingdom ended up being divided into the north and the south. And Simeon was in the north, and Levi was primarily in the south. There were a few in the north, but primarily in the south. So that's how they're divided. And then scattered in Israel. It's funny because Jacob didn't know that Levi was going to end up being the priestly tribe. But what happened was, when they were giving out land, the Levites didn't get any land because God was their inheritance, because they were priests. But they did get certain cities in each of the children of Israel's territories because they were serving there as priests. So they were scattered in the land. I'm just going to tell you how that one came through there. And then he comes to Judah. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Sounds pretty successful. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion. And as an old lion, who shall rouse him up? So that's where we get this term, the Lion of Judah, which is basically referring to Christ. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. This is the scepter that is part of this promise, that scepter. Nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. So this is basically a prophecy that Shiloh refers to Christ, that Christ is going to come from the line of Judah, of the kings of Judah. That's where he's coming from. And unto him, until Shiloh, shall be the gathering of the people. Shiloh means him to whom it belongs. And that's talking about the scepter or the kingdom. Who it belongs to Christ. And the gathering of the people shall be unto him. Shiloh was also ended up being a city, and it was actually the first place where the tabernacle from the wilderness was set up in a permanent way. And then continuing on in verse 11, talking about Shiloh, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. When you think about an ass's colt, what comes to mind is when Christ was on his triumphal victory, riding in Jerusalem on an ass's colt that had never been ridden before. And the crazy thing about that is when you think about a wild animal who had never been ridden before, and then somebody gets on him, that's going to be some wild ride. But Christ was a creator. He created animals. When he spoke, elements obeyed. Like when he was out in the sea with the disciples, and there was a big storm, and they were afraid they were going to die. And Christ came out from sleeping, I believe, and said, "Peace, be still." And this big, big old storm just, boom, silent. Because the elements obeyed him. But anyway, this little donkey that he rode in on, it didn't buck him off. It was honored to have the Creator, the Christ, the King, making his entry on him. And then it says, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. So now we're going to get to these other sons. I'm not going to say too much about them. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall have a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. His is on the shore. Issachar is a strong ass crouching down between two burdens. That sounds like a working animal. And he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder and bare, and became a servant unto tribute. Meaning they were a working tribe. Okay, 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Okay, so the word Dan actually means judge. The prophet Daniel is Dan-el. And it means God shall judge his people. So that's what Dan means. It means judge. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heel, so that the rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. That is Jacob just throwing in a little comment of his own. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at last. They're going to be attacked by nomads, but they're going to end up winning. Out of Asher, his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainties. What that's saying is that the bread shall be fat, meaning the land is going to really provide for him. Naphtali is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words. That's a deer that's like been released and boom, they just start running. It's kind of talking about that freedom, like a warrior just running. Joseph is a fruitful bough. That's like a branch. Even a fruitful bough by a well. Well, a well is where you get water, so this is where it would be nourished. Whose branches overrun the wall. So he was very fruitful when he was in Egypt, and I think that's what it's talking about here. It says the archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. Who would that be? His brothers. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. And then in describing God right here, there's a little parenthesis, and it says, from thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. We know that Christ is referred to as the good shepherd. So this is kind of a little prophecy about that. The stone of Israel. Well, when the children of Israel, later on here, when they end up leaving Egypt and they cross the Red Sea and they go to Mount Sinai, and they get thirsty. So, they start complaining, and God tells Moses to take his rod, which has performed so many miracles, which is God performing those miracles, and strike the rock. And out of that rock came water. How does that happen? So I'm going to tell you what that rock means. We can talk about it some more later, but I just lost my place. 1 Corinthians 10:4. Now it's speaking of the children of Israel. And did all drink the same spiritual drink? For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them. They dragged that rock and took it with them. And that rock was Christ. Okay, it was definitely symbolic of Christ, because that rock provided water for them many times. And when they were going to pass through this area, which they weren't allowed to actually, but they asked permission from the king of that area. Hey, can we pass through here? Because it was a shortcut. And, he said no. And then Moses says, well, we won't take any of your water. And this was a long distance. The reason why he could say that is because they had their own water source, this rock that they were dragging along with them through the wilderness. So now he's still blessing Joseph. And this goes to his sons as well. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. That means the whole earth is going to bless him. The blessings of thy father, so he's saying, my blessings, have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, of my fathers, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hill. So what he's saying, I'm adding to the blessings that God gave to Abraham, that were transferred to Isaac, that were transferred to Jacob, and now there's even more blessings. So he's saying that these are greater. They shall be on the head of Joseph. That was his favorite. And on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour his prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. He's going to be like a great warrior. And these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this it is that their father spake unto them, and blessed them every one according to his blessing that he blessed them. And he charged them and said unto them, I'm to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan. Okay? He wants to go back to the promised land, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. So Leah did not go down to Egypt. The purchase of the field and the cave that is therein was from the children of Heth. So this had been passed down, story had been passed down from Abraham to Isaac, and then Isaac passed it down to Jacob, and then Jacob is now passing down that story of how that land was purchased to all of his sons. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed. Remember, he had been sitting with his feet hanging over the bed. So he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost. He breathed his last breath and was gathered unto his people. Okay, so gathered unto his people were still alive, because we know that God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. So their souls lived on, and in Luke 16, we find out where they were. It talks about paradise. And when Lazarus and the rich man died, Lazarus goes into what's called Abraham's bosom, to paradise. And that's where people were, because until Christ was sacrificed, sins were not forgiven. So they were there. It was a good place. It was called paradise. So they were there. And so that's where he was going when it says he's going to be gathered unto his people. So that's it for that. And we'll get to chapter 50 next.